States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Eddie. Hey, Bill. Come on in.
I'm trying to get the rest of our folks straightened out.
Pardon?
I'm rounding up the herd.
Okay, all right. All right, well, before, just a quick note, this is the second event of Seniors for Slotkin. Who was at the first one at the Clarkson Library? All right, got a few hands here. That event had John Bauman from Shanana, and he's been, the reason he came is because he has been supporting Social Security and Medicare and trying to resist efforts by some members of Congress and the executive branch to reduce those benefits. But here's Bill Haney, the co-chair of Seniors for Slotkin.
Thank you, Phil. I'm going to talk loudly, so you can hear me. Can you hear me back there, Buck? Buck? Hey, here we go. All of us that live in the country, which is most of us, know what it's like on these roads. I just had to come 2.3 miles on Hummer Lake Road, and it was a mess. So I imagine what you had to go through. But anyhow, I'm glad you got here. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. There are a lot of them there, and some brand new ones. So people apparently took advantage of our recommendation that we bring along somebody we thought would be interested. Because this is an information session, it's not a political event. We did put a sign-up sheet here for those that want to get added to the Seniors for Slotkin group. Wonderful group of marvelous people it is. And it's been fun working with them. I really enjoyed it. Where's Nancy?
She's a part of the department.
Oh, you're going to give her a big introduction. Nancy Stroll played a very important part in this getting going early. This is a person who was a lifelong Republican, an office holder for a couple of decades, and yet she recognized early on that we had an extraordinary opportunity here and an extraordinary talent. And so she said, that's it, I've got to come out and support Elissa Slotkin. And I think, I'm not going to say it opened the floodgates, I don't really know how many people that brought in, but it certainly did. Hi Nancy, I'm talking about you. That's Nancy. Give Nancy a hand.
I was surprised when she was driving here.
So today's event came about, though, by the persistence of Phil, who was standing over there a minute ago and talking about me. Phil has been urging a gathering of the seniors for some time because he wanted to have Kevin Britt share his very insightful analysis of what happened in November of 18 in a very historic election, a very momentous election. And one thing and another, and Elissa's wonderful staff, which I'm not exaggerating, they are the best I've seen. Nella Louise Norman, who by the way is celebrating her birthday today, and we're going to send along something to Nella from Oakland County, and for Ellie, and for Hannah, and for Elissa. It's a return engagement for Elissa. Elissa had called me about a month ago and asked if she could help out on our annual gathering of collecting of maple sap and the long process of converting it into maple syrup. Does anybody know how many gallons of maple sap you have to gather in order to make a gallon of syrup? Somebody said 40.
Did you say it's 80?
50. It seemed like about 500. Anyway, we gathered 400 gallons, and we reduced it down. You cook it in the woods, you know, you get a lot of exercise, chopping the wood and then cooking the stuff, and it's out there, and Bob McGowan always brings fancy cheese and meats and stuff and wine from Rudy's. Is it Rudy's?
Yeah.
And yeah, Rudy's in Clarkston. Anyhow, we cooked it all down and took it home and finished it. About 5 or 6 of us did it this year. And out of that 400 gallons, here's what we got. Actually, we got a little bit more. And Wally, back there with the hat on, has got small jars, because it's like amber gold, you know, for the aforementioned Elissa and
Bill, right here, over here.
There they are. That's the
This guy.
So, that's how it came about. We put together really 2 things. Elissa had come out that day, we couldn't do maple syrup, so we retreated to the kind hospitality of Bob and Barbara McGowan, and it was nice, and we enjoyed it. We kept talking about what we could do, putting things together, and one of the things was this, how we could combine the 2 events, but the big thing being, of course, getting a report on the first 100 days from Elissa. So we're going to hear from a public servant who proved throughout her campaign, and has proved it, I think, every day since, that she took this over. She means what she was saying, that she doesn't have different stories for different interests of her varied constituencies, and it's quite a variety that you have, from Lansing to Rochester, and 3 counties. But she's got one story, and it's that she wants to hear from her constituents. They all count equally, whether they've been behind her from day one or whether they didn't even vote for her. And that's important. And I was with Elissa and her staff when she was sworn in Washington, and it was a wonderful event. All the ones that we've been to have been. And people ever since then, and we've seen Elissa now on television, heard her on radio, read the articles, has stepped forward and is making good on the commitment she made, which was to serve the best interests of this county, the other 2 counties, the constituents of these counties, and the national interest. And she has become, or maybe she already was, but what she's termed a radical listener. And I think that's a good term, because she does listen, and she not only listens, she pays attention, and she takes action. So one thing we're going to hear from Elissa is what has happened, the key events of that first 100 days. And I'm frankly delighted that I got the chance, and that a number of us, the seniors for Slotkin, had an opportunity to participate in what I think we already know is a historic election. And I think we have yet to see the best. So, with that, I would like to ask Elissa if she would come and share with us those first 100 days highlights. Come on.
Bill Haney's the best, by the way. Bill Haney's the best. And he wasn't feeling well this morning, and it's raining, so he has been a staunch supporter from the very beginning, and I thank you, Bill, for your unending support and humor.
You're welcome, but there's one more thing. Thank you. Remember this? This is an example, I think, of not only bridging the generational gap, but if you look at both of these faces, I'm going to pass this around, is that okay? Because it really sums up to me what her candidacy and her presence in the Congress really means. Like, you look at those faces. And now I'll get out of the way.
Well, good morning, everybody. Is it good morning? Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to get it at some point. Thank you for coming, especially given the weather is so nasty out. I did take a ride with Nancy. Where did Nancy end up sitting? There's Nancy. I did take a ride with Nancy, and if you were coming like we did from some dirt roads, the roads they're hurting right now. They're hurting, so thank you for coming out. And thank you to the original seniors for Slotkin who are in the room, who helped me during the campaign, who organized events, who came to events, who knocked doors, who did the whole enchilada, because that is how we won. And before I talk about the first 100 days as being a new member of Congress, I just want to thank everyone for everything you did to help me get here. We won this election through a combination of great voter turnout and, frankly, Republican women in Oakland County. That is how we won. We won Republican women by 16 points. And I know we've got a number of folks here who are lifelong Republicans. To me, that is a testament to bravery and to people being willing to sort of maintain their independence and reach across the aisle, sometimes for the first time. So that to me is something I'm very, very proud of. It's something I think we should recognize based on the district where we live, right? We could not have won without those women. So we ended up winning by 13,000 votes. I'm sure, like most of you, I know some of you were with us in Clarkston when we had our watch party. It was a nail biter. It was a nail biter. And it got better and better throughout the night. When the first totals came in, I think my stomach just dropped through my knees. But we ended up winning by a healthy margin. And when I got to Congress, you win. And you have exactly 1 week to shut down all your field offices, say goodbye to most of your staff, fix all your accounting, clean up everything, and arrive in Washington for what I call Congress School. And we had 3 weeks of Congress School. And the best thing about Congress School is you get to meet all these other freshman members of Congress, right? And just to review the bidding, there are 101 new freshman representatives, Democrats and Republicans. 64 Democrats and 37 Republicans, and 101 freshmen out of a body of 435 people. So anyone who's been in any organization, if almost a quarter of your people switch out and are new, that's going to create cultural change almost immediately. And it did. When I got to Congress, I met all the other folks who flipped districts like I did, all the other folks who won in true blue districts, Democratic districts, folks who won in hardcore Republican districts. You meet the whole thing. And the one thing I would say is we are a different class. It is a different breed of lawmaker. We have, like myself, been a former CIA officer. There's a former federal prosecutor. The guy who invented Belvedere vodka is in our class, which is made for some nice parties. There are former Navy commanders. There are people who have started energy companies. There are really interesting people in this class. So the first thing you notice as soon as you got to Congress School is that this class is ready to push change in Congress almost immediately. So the first week, we organized a little delegation to go and talk to the senior leadership in the Democratic Party on this score and urge that they do something radical and start meetings on time. They could not start meetings on time. And for someone like me from the Pentagon, steam was just coming out of my ears. So this class organized. We had 46 members, new freshman members, sign a letter asking for a bunch of changes, and one of them is a meeting should start within 10 minutes of its start time, right? We're on the taxpayer dollar. So if a meeting is 40 minutes late, you're wasting a lot of taxpayer time and money. Little things like that, and then big things like the pace of work. I think that there were a lot of members of Congress who are very comfortable. They've been there for 20 or 30 years. They've done this a long time. So their sense of urgency was totally different than those of us who just got elected. And you can feel that. They would say, well, we'll get to that in a few weeks, and we'd say now. And that is the overwhelming first thing I felt when I came into the class was cultural change. And then those of us who won, both Democrats and Republicans, tended to run on the same series of issues. The cost of health care, the cost of prescription drugs, infrastructure. Didn't matter if you were from Iowa or New Jersey or Michigan, we are going through a moment where we need once-in-a-generation investment in our infrastructure, whether it's for dams or a tunnel or our roads. And then most of us who won did not spend a ton of time just focusing on Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump is telling his own story, digging his own hole, doing his own thing. And I don't need to pile on to that because he's doing what he does every day without my help. We focus on local issues that would help people in our districts. For a group like Seniors for Slotkin, almost immediately upon arrival, protecting Social Security and Medicare. So we passed 2 bills, must have been within 2 months. We had a government shutdown. We were the first class in history to enter and be sworn in during a government shutdown. So that created for an interesting beginning. But there is a Social Security 2100 bill that basically helps make Social Security solvent into the next century, which is a bill that we all felt very firmly about. And then Medicare, making sure that we don't chip away at Medicare benefits, that we make sure that not only do we have Medicare benefits the same as what they are, but they actually increase as the cost of living increases every year with inflation. So those issues that I ran on during the campaign are still the ones I hear the most about. I don't think a week goes by that I don't have someone pull me over in Howell or at the Kroger, off Dixie Highway and say, like, I can't afford the insulin for my kid every month. So those are the issues that tend to still dominate. So those are the issues I've spent a lot of time in working on in Congress. We did a big piece of legislation just 2 weeks ago that, for better or worse, is called the ACA cleanup bill, the Affordable Care Act. There are a lot of problems with the Affordable Care Act, both in the way that it was legislated and written originally, but also the sabotage that has come over the past couple of years of the ACA. So that bill says that you should never spend more than 8% of your income on healthcare, right? Many people right now are spending closer to 15 or 16% of their income on healthcare. And just in our district, I have to invent a term for this. If there's someone that's really good at PR, please help me come up with a term for this. But remember during the housing crisis, we would talk about people being underwater in their homes. They owed more on the home than it was worth. So right now, people in our district are paying more in healthcare and prescription drugs than they are in their mortgage, and they are healthy, right? They pay $650 a month as a monthly premium. They have a $9,000 deductible, so they actually pay out of pocket for their entire year's medical bills, and they have these extremely high prescription drug costs. So they may be spending, on average, about $1,000 a month on healthcare and prescription drugs, and their mortgage is $500 a month, right? There's got to be a term for that. That is upside down. That is upside down. So we passed a bill that said you should never be spending more than 8% of your income on healthcare, which would, for some people, bring it down to half. And some other sort of technical things. On prescription drugs. So I'm a very practical person, right? I run on being a very practical person. So on prescription drugs, I have co-sponsored 2 original pieces of legislation. One of them was just taking exactly what Donald Trump said and putting it into a bill. Donald Trump said that Medicare should get to negotiate for drug prices, right? Use the bulk, it's like Costco, use the size of Medicare to get a really good rate on prescription drugs. Because military, I'm on military insurance, the VA can negotiate for drug prices. We're allowed to argue back and forth with the drug companies and get a better rate for our drugs. But Medicare is prohibited from doing that in law for no other reason than greed, just greed. So the president said the right thing, and he doesn't always follow up with what he said, but I thought it was our best shot of going with what he said, right? Medicare should be able to negotiate for drug prices. So that was one bill that we co-sponsored. The other one that I hear about all the time, and we talked about during the campaign, was stopping these predatory price increases, right? When a drug company, remember the EpiPen lady? When a drug company just decides one day that they're going to jack up the price of a drug by 100%, 200%. We've had 2 predatory price increases on insulin in the past 2 years. That's why you hear so much about people and their insulin costs, having to make trade-offs. And remember, insulin is not a new drug. It was invented in 1923. So this idea that somehow they need research, they're paying off the investment in inventing insulin is long past a good excuse. So we wrote a bill that basically says if you raise the price of a prescription drug more than 10% in 1 calendar year, you're going to lose exclusivity rights on that drug so that generics can come in earlier and earlier. So for every 10% price increase, you lose 6 months on the back end on exclusivity, right? Because we all know in our system, this is America, competition breeds better prices. So when these drug companies are the only ones in the market, of course they can jack it up by 10% and we just sit there and have to take it, right? They also pay to keep companies out of the generic market. It's amazing. So one of the big takeaways for me in my first 3 months or 100 days is the pharmaceutical industry is more capable than I ever thought of buying and selling our politicians. I mean, they're so good at it. It is amazing. And these companies have made it hard for our politicians to put forth a really strong series of bills on prescription drug pricing. They present a watered down one, but not a real one. So the big test will come in May, and I'm flagging that for you now as to kind of watch the space on prescription drugs. The Energy and Commerce Committee, the big committee that really writes the big legislation on prescription drugs, has been working on prescription drug pricing legislation, hopefully that combines a lot of our ideas, and they're going to put that forward through committee sometime in May. And we're going to watch and see what it does. If it's a serious prescription drug pricing bill that will really help people, that's fantastic news. If it's a watered down bill, I'm just flagging that will be a moment where I have to separate from my own party and call out this weak legislation that I am fearing might appear. And I will need your help on that. One of the other things that I noticed as being a new freshman in Congress is the squeaky wheel really does get the grease. Those letters, those emails, those phone calls that we get, they really do matter. I have someone who all he does, Austin from the campaign, if anyone remembers Austin, all he does is read the correspondence that comes in. We get about 1,000 pieces of correspondence a week, give or take, and he'll read all of it, and then he'll come and brief me and he'll say, here's the #1 issue we're hearing about, right? And sometimes it's very topical, like build the wall or don't build the wall. That was a popular topic. Very popular. And it was about half and half. On any given week, it was about half the letter said build it, and half the letter said please don't build it. But I'll tell you, the second highest, most popular letter or topic that we were hearing about in my first month was about a very specific conservation bill, right? It's now been renamed the John Dingell Conservation Bill, which actually passed, right? And it got signed into law by Donald Trump. But we hadn't yet voted on it, and it actually affects a bunch of our state lands here in Michigan. So a lot of people in our district wrote me letters about this very specific conservation bill. It's not in the news. We probably haven't, read about it very often, but people in our district knew about it, wrote me letters, made phone calls, and so suddenly I'm like, well, get me educated on this bill, right? Where is it? And what does it say? And what does it do? And that's because the public got engaged. I would say in any given week, one of the top 5 most popular topics I hear about, animal cruelty in some form or fashion. Puppy mills, right? Or sale of horse meat, testing on animals. There is a very large constituency. We all love our animals, right? I bet if I ask for a show of hands, most people here have some sort of animal at home. People love their animals, and they write about it, and they call about it. So all of a sudden, I was taking a position on horse meat. I'm against the sale of horse meat. But I didn't know that. I mean, I had to, we looked into it because because our constituents were engaging us. So I just wanted to put that out there, because I know we have representative from Senator Peters' office. Engaging your elected representatives does matter. And by the way, the database that we have that tracks all of this, if you're not from our district, I probably am not going to read it, right? Because I've got 1,000 letters from my own constituents. So if I get a letter from someone in Colorado, you know, if it's very specific, maybe it will get shown to me, but probably not, right? So it's a good reminder that writing to your representative is still the best way to get your voice heard. And that goes from senator down to, you know, your representatives in the House here in Michigan. So the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? When I have folks come in and talk to me from the ovarian cancer organizations or from the Alzheimer's organizations, they come and see me in Washington, they write me letters, they engage me on email. So I sign on to help support their appropriations so that those organizations get money for that research. So it really does still work in the ways that maybe our founding fathers wanted it to work, right? You can engage your representatives on something you care about, which I thought was heartening. The other themes I would say are, number one, you have to work very hard to be a bipartisan person. My district, our district, sent me to Washington to work across the aisle, to reach out to Republicans and work with them on bipartisan legislation because we are a party of two countries and we want two parties with empathy to be working on important legislation. That is the history of important legislation being passed. And the Republicans run the Senate, so you got to work across the aisle. So in my first month, I started a bipartisan freshman group. 7 freshmen Republicans, 7 freshmen Democrats. It was the middle of a government shutdown, just to try and understand each other, right? Get to know each other sort of socially. We wouldn't meet in anyone's office, we'd meet in a separate room. I might have brought some Michigan beer, you know, we just try to get to know each other. And it's been some of the most valuable time that I have spent because relationships are how Congress works. It's amazing. I can still build strong relationships, and that's how I get my bipartisan co-sponsors on my legislation. So of course I started with our own Michigan delegation, right? Michigan has 14 members of the House of Representatives, 7 Democrats, 7 Republican, right? So of course we got to know each other. Fred Upton from the Kalamazoo area, Paul Mitchell from the Thumb, Jack Bergman, General Bergman from up north in the UP. These have been some of the best relationships. They are the ones who have co-sponsored the most legislation with me. I'm doing a veterans event with Representative Tim Walberg out in the Lansing area. I'm speaking at MSU with Paul Mitchell. These are important things for us to show as leaders that it's important to do. And they've been very welcoming, even though I took the place of Mr. Mike Bishop, who was their colleague. They've been extremely welcoming to me and positive, and I think that is very important. It's important for things we all care about on Michigan issues, right? So I represent Michigan State University. Michigan State University has gone through a lot of trauma in the past 2 years on the Larry Nassar scandal. And we're not there yet in terms of getting to full health, right? So I'm co-sponsoring legislation with other Michigan Republicans that just makes clear that if there's a Title IX complaint in our university, so one of those complaints, if someone's been sexually harassed or sexually assaulted, that complaint has to be notified to the president's office, right? So there's no way the president of the university can claim that they didn't know that this stuff was going on. Because of course, almost 300 young women were assaulted before it really came to light. So that's Republicans and Democrats from Michigan co-signing a piece of legislation. It ups the chances of it ever getting passed. It ups the chances of Republicans taking it up in the Senate. That is how you get things done. Still, bipartisan. And I must say, I must give credit to Betsy DeVos. I have been hounding her on the issue of Title IX, right? She's in charge of it at the Department of Education. She is trying to change Title IX to make it harder for young people to come forward and file a Title IX complaint. I personally believe it's taking the absolute opposite lessons from the Larry Nassar scandal. I have written her, I have engaged her office, I have put in a Freedom of Information Act to see if she ever met with any survivors, ever, before she made these proposed changes. We filed a formal complaint, and I asked her for a meeting. And I must give her credit that on May 9th, she's agreed to meet me one-on-one in my office on the Hill to have a discussion about this and other education issues. So I will give her credit. We'll see what comes out of the meeting. But I appeal to her, Michigander to Michigander, to please, let's have a conversation before you make these changes that will affect Michigan State, and every university in the country, including Oak University. So bipartisanship is there, but it's just not the hot, sexy topic, right? What gets the media's attention are the extremes, far right and far left. So there are a group, a large group, in the middle, who believe in working across the aisle. Our leadership doesn't always want us working together, so sometimes it's a matter of staying strong against our own leadership, but it is something that happens every single day, and I'm extremely proud of that work, even if it doesn't go very noticed all the time. So obviously the other big theme that's sort of now ever present is we just had the Mueller report released formally yesterday or 2 days ago. I pledged to read the entire report. It's 448 pages. I have a giant binder. I killed a lot of trees in order to print it out, and have read through it. Obviously, I have some concerns about what the Russians did and then what the executive branch, our own White House, did in response. To be honest, given what the Russians did in hacking our systems, and in particular, buying social media ads, starting fake accounts that spread all over the country but were really targeted at Michigan, in any normal situation, we would have a blue ribbon task force with the greatest minds of a generation in national security and in Silicon Valley to see how we can protect our democracy, protect Facebook and Twitter and Instagram from these Russian-sponsored ads and just vitriol. They organized rallies, rallies in our state were organized by fake Russian activists, okay? The head, or the number 2 at Facebook, believes that those social media ads and those groups and all that messaging got to 129 million Americans. You had politicians retweeting Russian-made propaganda. So under normal circumstances, we would have a blue ribbon task force looking at protecting our democracy. We do not have that. So again, as a radical pragmatist, I have proposed a piece of legislation with my Republican colleague, Elissa from upstate New York. She and I actually worked together in the Bush White House, so we knew each other before we became members of Congress. And it's called the Paid Ads Act. And it's my big piece of legislation in the past month that basically closes a loophole saying that foreigners cannot buy ads in our political system. It is legal for them to buy ads for or against a candidate or on like a big issue of importance. Because we never thought it would be a problem, right? We didn't write laws. Certainly we didn't write laws for social media. But even for TV, we just didn't think that we'd have a Russian group that would be buying a TV ad. Now, we don't see them much on TV, but I don't, my joke is if anyone's going to be putting negative ads into our system, it's going to be Americans, gosh. I'm trying to take the Mueller report and do what I can from a practical perspective to protect ourselves in the 2020 election and beyond. Last thing I will say, there is definitely a conversation among the Democratic side of the House on sort of the progressive versus the moderate. That's a real conversation. First of all, I think it's a healthy conversation. I don't think there's anything wrong with that conversation. But I think it's important to remember that while the media is focusing on 3 or 4 new members of Congress, the 40 of us who flipped seats, only 4 of the 40 ran on a far left agenda, right? The other 36 ran on a broad-based, practical approach that reaches across the aisle. I think that's a very important thing to remember now, but also for 2020. Because Michigan, as we already know, is going to be the stomping ground for every one of the 150 presidential candidates that we seem to have. Obviously, President Trump has already been here, so we are just going to see, it's going to be like a stampede. Because as Michigan goes, so goes the nation. And as the 8th district goes, so goes the nation. We are right at ground zero. And I think it's important as we go into this presidential cycle to remember, number one, that again, despite what the media says, it's that broad-based approach that really appeals to people, practical. And then number two, the one thing I would just plead for everyone, no matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, is that I think it is a very, very negative thing to have what I call the circular firing squad in a primary, where people just attack each other, go after each other, use the same vitriol we criticize from Donald Trump and apply it within Democrats. And so what I'd ask people is always, talk about what you like about your candidate, not what you hate about somebody else, right? Be positive. Because the only way that we're going to change the tenor and tone of politics, which I deeply believe we need to do, is if we start with ourselves and we make sure we don't fall into the same trap that everybody else is falling into of contributing to that vitriol instead of trying to make it better. So that's my little report. We are having our grand opening of our Rochester Hills office in another week. We finally found real estate we could afford in Rochester Hills. So we have our Lansing office open and running. We've helped get back almost $200,000 in benefits on Social Security and for veterans. We've had over 40 public events. One big town hall, we'll have another one next quarter, or this quarter, excuse me. And we love it. My husband and I, Dave should be here right now. I don't know exactly where he is, but we are, it is the greatest privilege of our life to do this. We love it every single day. We get to do stuff we never dreamed we'd get to do. It is our honor and our privilege, and I thank you for doing it. And then particularly for Seniors for Slotkin, for helping us understand what we might be missing in terms of the issues for seniors on the ground in our district. Okay. So thanks very much.
Representative Slotkin, you are a freshman, obviously, but you're not new to Washington. You obviously worked in the Defense Department, the executive branch, National Security Council, national security agencies, and you briefed members of Congress and members of the Senate. And you mentioned how surprised you were at how the pharmaceutical industry, among other lobbying entities, are so pervasive in Congress. But I also want to know, is there anything else that's really surprised you in this, in your first 3 months or so?
It's a good question. I sort of referenced it, but I was amazed how really work gets done through relationships. I mean, in more than any industry or any organization I've ever been in, if I have a good relationship with a Republican colleague, you know, we can have a pull aside and have a real conversation, and I can convince them to come with me, or they can convince me to go with them on something. And I think that that's important. It's a good surprise. It's a good surprise that relationships still matter. I think that I think that there's a lot of people not from Michigan who think that passing something through the House of Representatives is all they have to do as part of their job. I mean, I've had representatives tell me from other states, like, you're going to work on things that just pass the House of Representatives. Nothing's ever going to get passed by the Senate and signed by the President, so just don't worry about it, Elissa. And I said, I don't know if you're from Michigan or you've ever been to the Midwest, but passing something through the House does not create a law, right? My constituents expect me to pass laws. So I was surprised that some members didn't have that same fire And then I guess I was surprised, given that we flipped a seat, and I met all these other wonderful people who flipped seats, that there has been such a exclusive focus on the far left, who didn't flip seats, right? The folks who are on the far left are from, Queens and LA and San Francisco and places where, as someone has said this week, a glass of water can win if it's got a D next to its name, And so what surprised me is how hard it's been to make that point and make it heard in the media and make it heard on the ground, that some of those folks, I would never judge them because they have to represent their district, but that does not represent where I'm from. So that's surprising.
Yeah, further to your part of your presentation where you're talking about how much phone calls, letters, communication with you influences your thinking, and also influences the thinking of your colleagues as well. So obviously, I support the legislation that you're working on. Talk about this, bill in draft of the Energy and Commerce Committee for the drugs. So we know how you're going to vote on it, but how can we influence anything else if other reps also aren't really paying attention to any calls or letters they get out of their district?
Yeah. So I think that they do. I mean, I wouldn't discount, and I know my Republican colleagues, they read their letters too, right? That doesn't mean they always agree with them, but I would encourage friends and family who are in different parts of Michigan to engage their representatives. I think that's a real thing. And then to be honest with you, a lot of the letters that I get are like a form letter, like an activist group says, click here to send a letter to your representative. Okay, we take that into account. But if someone takes the time to write me a thoughtful, serious note, we do constituent call time, where I will block time in my schedule and will call that person, whether they agree with me or not. They took the time to really send a thoughtful note, and that's different than the form letter. I probably will send a letter back if someone sends me a form letter, but we just take it totally differently. So I would encourage people to engage their representatives. And then, ask that those representatives appear in public, have a town hall, have to answer for those issues at home, not just in DC. So I think what's been interesting about the prescription drug issue, it's such a big issue, but it doesn't have like one big activist group that's organizing everybody, right? So it's not, the Sierra Club or one of these groups that's really organized and they have a mailing list and they're getting their members to do things. And so I'm concerned that we're not going to hear from people if this bill is not what it should be. And I'm encouraging everyone. And you can write me too, right? Because there's going to be pressure on me to just salute that bill. And if it's not strong enough, I need support to go against my own party. Yes, ma'am.
So how will you communicate with us is there a way for you to communicate with us when you need that support?
Yeah, so we we use Facebook, Twitter, and our website. Pretty much, that's how our main form of communication. My guess is we will do, given how important this issue is in our district, I will probably do a video, communicate via video on Facebook so that people can share it, just to keep people updated.
So basically, if I'm tuned in with you on Facebook,
yes.
I can get to what I need to do.
Yes, yes, exactly. We were thinking about how do we get more people to know what's happening kind of minute by minute in Congress. So we'll go back next Monday and we're thinking about just starting kind of once every couple of days, sort of, hey, did you know these bills are out there and they're actually coming up for a vote? And, just trying to bring, because it's hard. It's hard. I never knew what bills were coming up when I was not a congressperson. And so we've been thinking about how to bring people along with us for this one. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Is there anything new on financial reform?
Financial reform, so meaning on the financial... Campaign finance, yes. So campaign finance is an issue I became very passionate about because I had never raised $1 before I started running, and then we ended up having a very expensive race. And our campaign finance system is just broken. it's broken. And now part of that it's broken because Congress isn't legislating the right things, and some of it is because our Supreme Court made a very fateful decision called Citizens United, which basically treated corporations like people and allowed for hundreds of millions of dollars, at this point probably billions more, to come into our system since that decision was made in 2010. So, and the only way to change that is a constitutional amendment. So there's some really deep problems there. We did pass something called HR 1, our very first bill, first big bill in Congress, was a bunch of things like voting rights and government transparency, but it had a huge section on campaign finance reform. And a lot of it is transparency, right? So right now, if someone in this room decides you wanted to donate $15, you'd have to give me your name, address, and occupation. But if you wanted to give $15 million to a super PAC, you don't have to give them any information. You can be completely anonymous. It's backwards. So there was a lot we can do on transparency. And then frankly, I'm interested in a lot of things that they do, like at the local level in places like Colorado. They say you can only campaign the last 16 weeks before the election. Right? Right? So that would be amazing, right? Just changing the amount of time we can spend would also change the amount of money.
That's how the English way, right?
Yes, a lot of countries have a very limited campaign season. So that bill easily passed the House. Unfortunately, Senator McConnell has made clear he's not going to take that up in the Senate. So it's another important reason why elections matter. And what we've started to do now is break pieces off of HR 1 and put them forward as their own bills. Unfortunately, Mitch McConnell is so clear about the campaign finance reform piece, I do not think we're going to see much change. But we're going to try and force him to bring it up. He has a number of senators up for re-election that are very vulnerable. So we're hoping that some things that we would like to see passed actually move this in the next 2 years. But he controls a lot over there. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So I actually have some questions for the county. I have 2 sons that are going to be voting for the first time in the next election. And I just have to say it's nice to have someone from Michigan, not that we don't have others, but it's the bar is raised. It's, you're not out there swearing, you're not out there. And all the things you're saying you're not doing, like some of the extremes, it's so refreshing. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's
I
great.
still have an intelligent question to ask.
Well, the good news is for your sons who are going to be voting for the first time, we all passed Proposition 3 in November, which makes it so much easier to vote in Michigan. No reason absentee. You can vote absentee without having to give an excuse. That's huge if your kids are going to college or whatever, right? So we'll probably start educating people through our communications on how much easier it is to vote, which is fantastic, especially for young people. Yes, sir.
Now, you've had 100 days in Congress.
Yes.
Has your opinion of Nancy Pelosi changed?
So, just to review the bidding, I was one of 15 members of Congress who did not vote for Nancy Pelosi when she was up for our speaker. That was something I committed to actually almost exactly a year ago, before I won. That was for a very specific reason. It wasn't personal, because I didn't know her. It was because for many in our district, they feel that she represents how the Democratic Party has left the Midwest and left Michigan. For many people, they would express this to me. They have been Democrats their entire lives, but they feel like the party has lost focus on working people and focused more on the coastal elites who are focused only on social issues and not the economy. I'm not saying that's fair. I'm just telling you that is what I heard very strongly throughout the campaign. So I committed to voting for someone else. And then I got elected, and no one was running against her. Well, that creates an interesting conundrum. So here's what I did, and this is why I think hopefully this new freshman class really, the differences with us really do matter. I tried to handle that as professionally as I could. I didn't go in the media and rub salt in the wound and talk about how I don't like her for this and that. I went to go see her privately for an hour and 15 minutes. We met privately. I explained to her where I was coming from, that it wasn't punitive, and she understood it. She respected it. It doesn't mean she loved it, but she understood it. That, to me, was a signal to her that I was not going to be mean-spirited as a member of Congress and certainly towards her. And then, of course, I worked my whole life around the Pentagon and the CIA. Once a decision is made, that doesn't mean you love it. You go forward and you respect that decision, right? And she is the Speaker of the House. But I do think she's handled some things very well tactically. I mean, the government shutdown, right? She said to all of us, this very diverse group, she said, if we negotiate with him before we reopen the government, President Trump will close down the government every time he's unhappy about something. We can't do that. And she kept us together, and we got out of that government shutdown, right? So I do think in terms of engaging with President Trump, it's been fun to watch. And so there are things that I think she's done very positively. I still wish that she would make sure there's a stronger focus on the Midwest. I'm not going to stop thinking that. But I respect when someone handles things tactically, and I think she has, in the first 3 months, she has done some of those things quite well.
Thank you.
Yeah, last question. So I'm going to take, about one more, and then I've got to run. And Nancy, since we talked, yes, sir.
I see that because filing season just coming through.
The what? Sorry?
Filing season.
Well, filing.
Just
I thought you said violent season. I said, what?
Yes.
Yes. Filing season. Yes.
There's some corporations now they're saying 2018 are paying no tax even though they have exorbitant earnings that they're showing. And I think the same way with some very wealthy Americans. Is there any movement by the Democratic leadership that they would look at this as an issue? I mean, you've got larger deficits as a result of the Trump tax reform. Or is that something that would be waiting for 2020?
So I think, so first of all, can I just get a show of hands, because I think this is an interesting point. I've heard from a lot more people about the 2017 tax bill in the past couple of weeks, because it's the first tax season where people have actually had to go ahead and file and see what they owe or what they're owed compared to previous years. So just out of curiosity, is anyone getting back more than they got back in previous years? Okay, all right. And then is anyone getting back less or owing less? Okay, okay. So I think that is sinking in for a lot of people. I think when that tax bill was first put into law, Chrysler gave a bonus to everybody. Consumers Energy cut the price of energy. We heard a lot of positive press. So when I talked about the tax bill, people would say, well, I think it's positive, right? I've got $700 bonus in my pocket, and I can't complain about that. But here we are at tax season, first time we filed under the new law, and people in this room, so not ultra-wealthy, major multimillionaires, are paying more, not less. I think that is deeply affecting people. And I think that's good, because I am deeply concerned as a national security person about the deficit. I think it makes me very nervous to run this level of a deficit when we don't know what is coming around the corner. What if we had 3 superstorms in one season? We just don't know, right? So I consider myself a fiscally responsible, leaning towards fiscally conservative person. I think that the tax bill is being discussed right now as a relook at the tax bill when it comes to the issue of infrastructure. Because we all know we need infrastructure investment. The president said that. But the president drafted a bill that relied on states and private industry to fund infrastructure. So you can say all you want. If you don't have money coming in, then you're not going to fix your infrastructure. So there's also in May is going to be an important time. May is when we're going to look at infrastructure. There's an infrastructure bill that will be coming through the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And everyone's big question is, this is a term of art, what's the pay for? How are we going to pay for it? And I think one of the things that's on order, I have not seen it yet, is this idea of relooking the 2017 tax bill. Is there a loophole that you can close, for instance, for corporations going abroad? That you close that loophole, you tax them appropriately, and that's how we help pay for our infrastructure. So that's the way that I've heard it. But I think I've heard more from the public on that tax bill in the past 2 weeks than I had in the preceding year and a half. So, all right, I'm going to leave everyone in the good hands of Kevin, I think, from Senator Peters' office. He's great. Thank you for taking the time to come. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to Seniors for Slotkin for rallying. And we will certainly need your advice on what we're missing, what we're not hearing on the ground in order to better perform in Washington. Okay. Thank you.